Happy Wednesday and happy November. Welcome to Lasso's webinar, Navigating the Marketing Business Development Sales Continuums, featuring Chris Fritsch, President of Clients First Consulting, a treasured Lasso sponsor. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Michelle DeSegli, Executive Director of the Legal Sales and Service Organization, commonly known as Lasso, which I'm betting most of you do know is an organization focused solely on you, legal sales and service professionals who are primarily responsible for client acquisition and retention, as well as organizational growth. Today, we're honored to have with us Lasso co-founder Silvia Coulter, a co-founding principal with Law Vision, another treasured Lasso sponsor, who will be moderating our time together. I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to ensure you all know that registration is open and early registration rates are in effect for our 2024 Rain Dance Conference, which is set for June 5th and 6th at the Aloft in Boston. Details are available on the Lasso website, and if you subscribe to our monthly newsletter, which I'm sure you all do, those details should have landed in your inbox last week. And now, Silvia, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Michelle. Welcome, everyone. It's really exciting to be co-hosting and moderating with Chris Fritsch, who is a rock star, in my opinion. And so we're going to talk about this marketing BD and sales continuum, and what is that, and how to CRM and managing client contact and other data in that continuum. And so I'm excited to introduce Chris, who everybody probably knows. She's the founder and marketing technology success consultant with Clients First Consulting, and she'll probably tell you a little bit more about their new product that's out. It's out, right? It's out, Chris.
In pilot,
Chris has had amazing experience. She's a JD, and did you ever practice? I don't know.
No,
Tell us.
no,
never practiced.
Recovering attorney.
Recovering attorney. Okay. And she's been in the legal industry for her entire career and has been in sales, has been a sales achiever, and she's really an expert in CRM, probably the expert in CRM these days. And so, Chris, it's really exciting to have you here. So I want to kick this off. Let's start with, rather than just jumping in and saying, let me admit some people here, rather than just jumping in and saying, okay, let's talk about CRM and ERM and how that fits with business development. Let's start by defining, because we hear so many definitions. We hear marketing and business development and sales, very seldom sales, but nevertheless sales. We hear all of these used interchangeably, and now we're really seeing the emergence of expertise and law firms hiring in these separate areas, as corporate America has done for years, and other professional services firm. So let's talk about the difference between the three of these. And Chris, I'll kick it over to you to start this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Having worked in a sales organization years ago, I think one thing that, while we talk about the differences, we also need to emphasize how important it is that they all be coordinated and work together. And I always perceive, and this is sort of a generalization, but marketing is more of the one-to-many. It's about trying to get recognized and trying to define needs in the marketplace and find ways to solve problems. And, we'll talk about some more of that. While I've always said, sales is actually closing the deal, right? Sales is the one-on-one, whereas marketing is one-to-many. You're trying to get your information out there. Sales is actually going out and speaking personally to someone and getting them to agree to get your product or service. And I love, when you and I were talking about this session, and I said, sales and BD, and you said BD is different. And I went, what do you mean? I've always thought, BD is just the word that we use because it's more politically correct in the law firm. And you had an amazing point. You said, no, really now, BD has become, within law firms, all of the support for the attorneys in the sales process. So while they may do the actual closing of the deal in many cases, most cases, but BD is there to anchor them, to support them. And it's a completely different thing now. And I love that you said that. I thought that was brilliant.
Well, thank you. I have my moments. And it, it's still being interchanged, right? It's still being used interchangeably. But here we see what we mean by one to many. And, we don't need to read this to all of you, but marketing is, and I think the aspect, Chris, of one to many is that we don't have a lot of control over the next step, right? So we don't necessarily, generally speaking, we don't know what happens after people have read our articles or our blog posts, or they've been at a conference we've spoken at, right? I mean, we hope to carry that ball forward and across the finish line, but really one to many, we do not have as much control over the next step. However, we do know that it's branding us, it's branding the firm, and so it's very, very important. And
Yeah,
then
and
we have, you go ahead, sorry.
yeah, what I'm seeing a lot more of now is just in the last few years, the marketing team sort of struggling to define how, their role in this and bring more leads forward, not just sort of blast everything out, and actually do some ROI analysis. So, in a perfect world, everybody would like to be able to track, from a lead, we sent out a communication, we got a lead from that. We had an event, we got a lead from that. We took somebody to something, we got a lead from that. What do we do with those? And how do we actually, in our marketing and BD capacities, contribute to the bottom line, ultimately in sales? So we need to justify our existence and, that we are incredibly valued to this process. And I always say, if the firm cannot effectively communicate and send e-communications and invitations, and effectively target and segment, it makes it incredibly difficult for the attorneys to close deals or develop business. They got to have that marketing support, and ideally you want them to be coordinated. And I am seeing more of that. Marketing is now pushing the tracking of the events in the ROI, trying to track leads in what we call a pipeline from start to ideally finish and even beyond finish. So, we had a lead, it became a client, and how much work are we going to get now? And can we track the work we're getting now and how much that's worth back to what we spent to acquire the client to begin with? And I mean, we're just early days on this, but I am
early days. Yeah.
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 Yep.
And then we have BD. And I think the key here is, how do we build bridges from each of these, right? So, think of these big ponds, and marketing's on one side, and then on the other side of the first pond is BD, and on the other side of that pond is sales. How do we build a bridge over those ponds? And that's going to be key. Back to what you were saying is, are there data analytics? Are there things that we can show that, how the marketing activities are supporting the BD activities, and ultimately those activities that are actually driving the revenue, closing business, closing new matters. So BD functions, and again, this is a position that we see growing in the firm. A lot of people are coming from marketing to BD, and this is providing sales support to the lawyers. So again, we understand that some BD people are client facing, and so we're not saying it's exclusively internal, but it's not necessarily out there on the front lines closing business with revenue responsibility tied to your compensation. And that's where we're seeing that third one, sales. So we'll talk about that. So BD, we just interviewed a whole bunch of BD people who called themselves BD people, but in fact, they are salespeople, and there are 16 of them in this particular law firm, and they are out on the front lines generating leads, passing those leads into the firm, and they're tracking those leads and helping the partners close the business. So, but they see themselves as BD. They are not, believe it or not, directly responsible for closing the business, but they all have sales backgrounds, which is really, really interesting. So this BD it's got a lot of legs to it, right? It's got a number of different definitions to it, but distinct and different from marketing, because now we really are in that active sales pipeline, or sales funnel, as some call it.
Yeah, this bridge development, I like it. I like that new name. it's really come a long way. I've been doing this obviously a while. And I remember when you couldn't say business development in a law firm. You certainly couldn't
Right. I
say
remember that
sales.
too. That just means
And
we're
now
old, right?
we're approaching a point where people do say sales, and it's not sort of a bad word anymore. But I remember when business development first started to become a thing, that, suddenly these firms who, the day before, had 10 marketing managers, the next day they had 10 BD managers. And they were exactly the same people, but they didn't necessarily, have that whole background in sales. Now we're seeing these business developers are coming in with a strong sales background. And I think that's a really great evolution.
Absolutely. And then we have, speaking of sales, then we have the sales positions, right? And so there are people entering law firms. Firms are starting to build sales teams like the one I just talked about. We have people on our Zoom today who have strong sales backgrounds, who worked on quota and commission, including us, but I see some other names on here of people who were in those roles in business. And so this is where the rubber meets the road, right? This is where we are directly responsible for helping with revenue generation. And it's tricky, and firms are figuring out how to compensate these people, how people get the credit because the partners get the credit. And it's all in a stage of infancy that has been 20 years in the infancy stage. And now I think we're starting to finally spring out of infancy, but it's early stages. And so these are, this is really where we're getting into forecasting. This is where we're getting into tying ourselves directly to revenue. There's responsibility here. And in the worlds we came from, frankly, if you weren't on quota, you were out, right? There was no middle ground. So this is really putting it on the line here. So it's a very different position than the BD positions. And so, but I think we'll see more and more of this, and a good glance back at the accounting industry, it, shows us that 20 years ago, the accounting firms were just starting to hire salespeople. And now, I mean, it seems like they've had them forever, and they are in traditional sales roles, right? So I think this is the evolution that we'll see in the legal industry. It started before COVID, and then it kind of took a hiatus and everything shut down, including looking at building these sales functions in firms. But we'll see it. But all of these positions are really important. And this is the marketing BD sales continuum. This is what it looks like. So all of it's important. All of it feeds into the firm's revenue. So let's get into the meat of more of this and how we really track these things, Chris, and how we look at results and monitor activity and all that sort of thing. Because historically, I would say, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say CRM was nothing but a fancy way to keep your holiday card list organized, right? And so it's really progressed. Look at what we've got in these law firms now is we're hiring marketing technologists. We're hiring people who really understand how to work with and use data. And now this brings all this technology that supports this continuum to the forefront.
Yeah. And in fact, I have a client who needs to hire, they are about to do a big project. And so, they just brought in an experience management system, and now their CRM has got to be replaced because it's being sunsetted. And, in a perfect world, they need a CRM manager, they need an experience manager, and they also want a marketing technology director level position so that everybody's not reporting, up into the marketing team. And these positions, someone I know got placed, and they said that the recruiter said, you're a unicorn. There's like 5 of you in the country that do this. And I mean, there's probably more than that, but those positions are commanding over $200,000 in salary, up to one of them was was over 400. So I think that does reflect that this is a new thing, having someone that, can really do all of the marketing technology. And the other trend that I'm seeing is, yeah, you're right. tracking and doing pipelines is such a new thing. The lawyers have taken a long time. We tend to be 10, I used to say we're 10 years behind, in technology. Well, with pipelines, I was saying, 10 years we were later, we were 10 years behind, and now we're 15, and we're finally getting there. So this whole accountability and sales tracking is taking longer than most technology, but I am excited to see that marketing is driving it in a lot of the big firms, even though, I think we have more challenges, like you said, with compensation because of some of the ethical rules and how those are perceived. And, it varies by state. But we are definitely having more of a transition to the sales culture along the continuum, and the technology. The accountants, they buy CRM to do pipeline. They don't do as much e-marketing and event management necessarily as they do, but they want that pipeline because they're numbers people, and everyone uses it. They sit down and they look at the pipeline, and it's firm wide. I've got one accounting firm client I'm working with. They have 3 pipelines because they have 2 companies and the accounting firm, and they maintain them. And so that was a big part of the CRM hunt, was to find the pipeline technology.
Yeah, interesting.
We're just
well, Chris, let me just quickly ask you a question. As a CRM and data quality success consultant for 20 plus years, so I consider you an expert for sure. You are the expert on managing, contact and relationships through the databases the firm has. How do you see firms capturing and managing this information now, and what's it on the doorstep of what's to come? What's on the doorstep of what's to come?
Yeah. So, I saw this image and I just loved it. It's like we're just buried in data silos, we call them. We've got, people used to use Outlook for contacts. Now, not so much. I've talked to very senior level attorneys. Last week, we do a lot of CRM success assessments for firms that are looking to move systems. And so I talked to a lot of attorneys, and they're like, Outlook is terrible for managing contacts. I personally disagree. I use it like crazy, but the lawyers, that people are different and they don't. And I always ask, where are they? Well, they're in their phones. There's a guy that's managing his in a Word doc so he can do his BD follow-ups there, but they're not utilizing technology like they should. And Outlook has just not turned out, it's just not used like it used to. And, they're putting notes in the document management system. I was talking to a firm last week where they're tracking BD activities, and they're attaching things in document management. And boy, have we got spreadsheets for everything, And so one of the nice things about CRM now is they are trying to get all of the spreadsheets into the system. If you can put it in a spreadsheet, you can track it in the CRM, and then it's not living, in document management or on somebody's hard drive. If you want to track ROI, you want to track speaking opportunities, you want to track events, sponsorship information, all of that information can go in the CRM, and then you can export it to a spreadsheet later if you need it. And then we're all, of course, living buried in email and reports. A lot of people are building forms because, the attorneys have shown they don't want to use the CRM. For years, we told them that, you're going to get this tool and you're going to spend this money, and you're going to get value out of this system. And while I could argue all day long, they are getting real value out of the system, it doesn't balance the amount of time and money on their part to get the data in. And so they've really sort of pushed back and said, my philosophy has become, let lawyers be lawyers. And you mentioned we, are developing a new piece of software. And the whole philosophy is, if the lawyers want to be involved, great, you might have a pilot or two, and we'll address that. But for the most part, let most lawyers be lawyers, because we've been doing this for 20 years. And for 20 years, we've been banging our heads on the desk because they're not using the system and they want to do it now even less. So let's find new ways. If the lawyers aren't going to participate, we need to get their data, and we need to get them, instead of data in, they should spend their time getting value out. And so lots of ways, we can talk about that, but it's really become automation, things like ERM systems to capture the contacts so they don't have to, or their assistants don't have to put things in and update things. The ERM minimizes some of the data stewarding that has to be done because it's bringing in good recent contacts. It's creating who knows who relationships based on the recency and frequency of email communication. so that you actually can get a who knows who when they want to know, hey, I need to reach out to somebody. Does anybody in the firm know this person? Let's get off the blast emails to everybody in the firm around who knows who. Do you know this person? Think about how much collective billable time that wastes, and eventually it just gets tuned out anyway, so it's not even effective. So
Chris, to your point, I want to give an example here of something somebody presented not too long ago, and this is a firm with, I think, about 1,200 lawyers globally, and I forget what the number of webinars was that they do or they run, but it was some staggering number of webinars across the firm and across the jurisdictions. And basically, to your point, they're taking, all right, here's our information, here's who got invited, right? So let's give a practical example here. So here's who got invited to whatever, let's just take one webinar, for example. So, and then here's who opened the invitation, didn't reply. Here's who registered. Here's who actually attended. And so all of that data is tracked in their CRM system, every bit of it. And now how do they act on that? So those who didn't attend, those who did attend, there's follow-up at every step of the way by the BD people. So marketing does prepares everything, gets the webinar going, works on the topics with the lawyers. BD is focused the BD team is focused on the lead gen aspect. And then, there's communication that goes out through the CRM system to the people who opened the invite and did nothing with it, to the people who registered but didn't attend, and then to the attendees. And so the attendees, those are considered live prospects because they did attend, they're interested in the information. And then they track, in addition to those, go into the pipeline, right? And those go into a CRM system, I think, managed underneath, all this better than I do, with some kind of tracking system. And then the sales team picks it up from there, and they make calls to those people, and they try to generate first appointments with the lawyers. And then they track, ultimately, did any new matters or new clients come out of this? And they've got all the numbers, but that's an example of what you're talking about in terms of everything from the lawyers contacts, however they're keeping them. Hopefully now, the lawyers are seeing more value because of that continuum, and they've been able to experience the whole thing.
Well, and I think that's nirvana, right?
Right.
In most firms, nobody's picking up the phone to call somebody who went to a webinar. Nobody. I mean,
right.
Our firm's doing it, and kudos to you. We've had to learn this ourselves, right? We did a lot of webinars, and we'll get a lot of people. And I would submit that it's not just the people on the webinar. I was supposed to be on a webinar yesterday, but I had to be on an airplane. So I signed up because I want to watch the recording, and I want to watch it after hours on my own time and, take notes and follow up. So it's beautiful that we've got e-marketing technology that we can use to have different processes around the invitations. So, you've got drip campaigns, and you've got people who said they're going to attend, they get one message. The people who said RSVP, no, I can't make it, they're going to get another message. And the people who don't respond are going to get a reminder message to nurture them to show up, for the webinar. But the key is, what do you do for follow-up? And for years, it was nothing. We hope the phone rings. Woohoo. But it might, right, a couple times. And so we actually had to be more intentional about how we were going to track this and how we were going to do follow-up. And so, when you're training your attorneys to do webinars and speaking, the follow-up is the sales aspect, and that's what they really need to do. And, it's rare that anybody would pick up the phone and call somebody. But man, if I download a white paper from PwC or any of the big consulting or accounting firms, I click, give me the button for give me the report, and my phone rings. And I'm just used to it. I don't think anything of it, but I think we're sort of timid about not wanting to do that.
Yeah.
But
and again, it's building those bridges, right? It's okay, we've got all these things in place. Let's build the bridge. And that's what's missing, right? So we fall into the water.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And the BD building of the bridge is after the event, when you send the follow-up, you don't just send a thank you note to the attendees. You send a thank you note to the didn't attendees with the link of the recording so they can watch it on their own. And then you also follow up with, when we do it, we follow up with 3 different emails, personal emails, because if somebody asked a question that maybe we didn't get to, or they wanted more information, we'll actually follow up personally and say, hey, thanks for attending, and you had a question. You want to jump on a call to discuss? And that has upped, the actual new client ratio significantly, just because people are busy and you're actually reaching out. And if they're on your webinar, if they're at your event, they're interested, and they want your help, So I think we can take that next step and do more sales, and it's okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's coming, right? It's coming. And so let's talk about the lawyer side of this, because there's always people who are going to say, but our lawyers won't follow up. We do client interviews, our lawyers won't follow up, getting the lawyers engaged. So let's start with, how do we even get some of this data into the system so that we can begin this continuum?
Yeah. So, for years we've the definition of CRM success or madness, whatever, was that how quickly could we roll it out? We buy the system in January. How quickly can we have it rolled out and be done? Well, I said, you're not going to like my answer. You're never done. And if you think you're done, then you've missed the point. This is supposed to be a process. And so, follow up is something that it's going to constantly be changing and evolving. But now we've got to the point where we can't even get the attorneys, to put their contacts in. So we have let lawyers be lawyers. We need to automate this process to capture the contacts using ERM. When those contacts come in, those who know who's are created by ERM. Now we need to do things like targeting and segmenting. So maybe we're focused on industries. If we're a smart firm, a lot of smart firms are focused on industries. Well, how are we going to get them tagged? Like, send me a list of everybody in the whatever industry. Almost every big firm I've ever worked with says we want to do industry tagging. I can count.
So Chris, let me stop you there. Sorry to interrupt, but just in case anybody isn't sure what these things mean, tell us what ERM is, and tell us what tagging means.
Yeah, the tool I referenced earlier, ERM, is Enterprise Relationship Management, and it's on the Exchange server. It doesn't require the attorneys to do anything, and it captures the contacts from the signature blocks of emails and builds contacts. It's like a business card scanner for signature blocks. And based on recency and frequency of communication on Exchange server, it will tell you who knows who based on who's emailing who quite a bit. And there's an algorithm that works in the background, but it will create new contacts without the attorneys or their assistants having to do anything. So that's one way, is automation. You can build workflows to capture. I got a firm I'm working with. They've done a great job capturing experience data. And the way they've done it is, I thought it was a tool. Well, no, it's really a more manual process that they've done, where there's a form on the intranet. And when a matter comes in, the tool does a few things, but then people on the BD team go out and sit down with the attorneys. And there's a form on the intranet that the attorneys do need to fill out to be included in everything. And there's some basic information, but then the BD team follows up. And that's where the BD people are so important in this process, is they are sort of bridging that gap. I had a client that said to me, well, at our firm, we provide white glove service to the attorneys. We sort of do all the hand holding. And I thought to myself, that's pretty much every law firm I've ever worked with, right?
Sure, yeah.
The staff support the attorneys, and that's good. So let's have them support them in this BD effort. Let's have them enter the information into the pipeline, generate the reports and the analytics, figure out the competitive intelligence about, the competitor's situation, figure out who we know, and sit down with the attorneys and have a strategy session about how to go out and reach them. One of the smartest things I heard, and this was not this year, this was like 12 years ago. I want to say it might have been Allen and Overy, but I believe their idea was they had a team when the lawyers went out to pitch that it was like a customer service or a client service role. And they would go with the attorneys on the meetings, and they were the dedicated person just to provide that extra layer of service. Mm-hmm. But in reality, they were salespeople. And so, if a lawyer goes out to talk about litigation and the client doesn't have any litigation needs, it's like, oh, well, that was pointless. But really, other things come up, like maybe they have a tax problem. And these BD individuals knew all the tax attorneys. They knew everybody in all the different offices. They knew all of the firm's practices, and they were trained to listen for an opportunity that wasn't litigation in the litigation meeting. It's like, if you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Well, these people were, they were a Swiss Army knife. They knew all the practices. They knew all the attorneys. Really smart way to engage BD to support closing business.
Yeah, it's it's let's not wait for the lawyers to do these things, because they're very, very busy. They have incredible pressure to bill time. And some of this, you just be proactive. I think that's a real key here, because you've got all the tools you need. You understand the continuum now, and you've got to look at all the way from starting point. What do we hope happens after we hit send to on this newsletter, or we hit send on this blog, or we post this to LinkedIn? What do we hope happens, right? And so that's a question, I think, that is the responsibility of the marketing and BD teams to really think about that bridge they're building and what has to happen next. And maybe some of these things are generated, the follow-up, the reports, those kinds of things are generated by the BD people.
Yeah. And, how else can we automate this? So what we were talking earlier, so many firms want to be industry focused, and it's a process to get industry information onto those records. It's hard to even pull a client list. It seems like the most basic thing, but just because you have a contact in your CRM, that doesn't mean you know that person's a client. It doesn't mean their company is even in the system. And so, that's a big part of what my data team does, is they're building company records and tagging clients. And then the people who are attached to the clients can be pulled for a client list. But to the attorneys, they're like, why can't we get a list of our clients? Well, it either has to be done manually, or it has to be done through an integration with time and billing. Those start at, I don't know, $10,000 to $25,000 when you're doing your implementation. And that still doesn't get you other data like targeting data, like industries. People want to add industries to the records. Well, to do that, again, you either do it manually and you pay a lot of people to do it, or you go out and you get a subscription to one of the D&B type services, and you pay thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for that. And again, you pay an integration, and suddenly you sit down and spend a lot of time matching records, and you can get industries brought into your system. And it's tens of thousands of dollars to maintain that every year. But suddenly I can pull an energy list for my energy seminar. And that's one of the things I see. Firms talk about it. Everybody wants it. And I can count on, I don't know, half of a hand how many firms have actually taken that step and bought the data feeds and brought in the business and industry information. So like with our tree system, we're just bringing that in because it's just so important. It's not maybe going to be perfect, but in law firms, it's funny, the perfect is the enemy of the good. You'll have lawyers see this data and they'll go, oh, well, that little piece isn't right, so therefore the system is bad and I won't use it. But they neglect the fact that yesterday I had nothing, and now 80% of my clients have industries, and I can actually pull the energy list for the energy seminar. And it's a big thing to be able to target and segment and take that off their plates.
I think the point you're making, I don't know if we have a slide on this, but I think the point you're making is, feed the information, right? You have it at your fingertips, so feed the information to the lawyers that they need. And one thing that we've seen too is there's all this information. In fact, I was talking with someone this morning about this. Go pull a competitive intelligence report. The question was, I can't get this partner to give me information about his contacts at client X. And therefore I can't really work with him on expanding the client opportunity. So this was another lawyer saying this, right? And I said, go get a competitive intelligence report and show the lawyer who else is working with his client and all the other contacts the client has. So you can expand this beyond just lawyer contact. It's intelligence, right? We're talking about intelligence overall. And all of a sudden, that lawyer's eyes open up, right? And by the way, the lawyer I was talking to said, I don't think we have, this is a 2,000 lawyer firm, I don't think we have competitive intelligence reports. And I said, oh yeah, you do. You do. Trust me. And so until they, I think the point I'm trying to make is until they need something or until it really hits home, they don't pay attention to it because they are so incredibly busy. And I know we're all busy, so add double to that. They are really, really busy under huge amounts of pressure. And so sometimes you have to really make it reality. And a big part of all this, Chris, is collaborating with others in the firm who are good at managing data, maybe library knowledge management, and work as a team to figure out how do we work together to make this happen and start producing reports that are more than, oh, number of pitches, number of RFPs we completed, number. Now we got to be tracking data at a much more sophisticated level in those three buckets we talk about: marketing, BD, sales. And whether you have salespeople or not is irrelevant. It's, you're still, the firm is still selling, the firm is still building revenue. And so how do we bring this home to the lawyers? And I think collaborating with others in the firm is really key. This is just not all about the marketing and BD team. You can't do it alone.
Yeah. So one of the firms I'm working with right now, they they have actually purchased PitchBook because it aligns with their practice focus, and they have integrated it into their CRM system. Excuse me. And they narrowed it down to their top, I want to say 250. And they brought the PitchBook feeds in so that the lawyers can get that competitive intelligence right there. Or usually it's the BDs that get the intelligence and share it. But so many firms, the attorneys don't know that they have competitive intelligence reports. So many firms where I'm doing CRM success assessments, they're changing systems, they're upgrading, they're investing, and you meet with the attorneys and the attorneys say, I had no idea we had a CRM system. And these are firms that have had CRM for 20 years.
Yeah.
So, it's a, we keep fighting the good battle.
Yep. So data quality is always an issue, right?
Yep.
Whether, and we hear about that. And so what's the importance? What, if we're going to be tracking revenue, the continuum, and we're going to be tracking from, potential lead generation to lead opportunities all the way to new business, and that might be 3 years down the road, right? New business doesn't happen right away. It's, again, a long relationship building process. So at its core, we're always talking about relationships, internally, externally, and managing the data. So that's another challenge. We might have 5 different ways that we say PwC. We've got PricewaterhouseCoopers, we've got capital P, capital W, capital C, we've got capital, right? So it gets very, very confusing and bogged down in all of that. And back to a point you made a while ago, the lawyers see one mistake and they think the whole thing is bad. So quality of data is really becoming important. It always has been important, so it's not becoming, but it's becoming important as data analytics takes front and center, because everything is now based on data analytics. In fact, just a quick break for a minute, I heard on the news yesterday that there is a company in Europe that has hired a robot, an AI robot, as its CEO. And that CEO was interviewed, and she's going to be making all her decisions about the company and running the company on data. So I hope that's not really coming to all our worlds, but anyway, data quality nevertheless is really important, because we could be making major decisions on bad data if it's not right.
Yeah, and in the past, 30% of your data degraded each year. Well, now I would submit it's closer to 50, with people work from home and global nomads and the Great Resignation and job changes, and so it's now like 50%. And if the data is not good, you can't target, you can't segment, you can't do that client list, that industry list. You've got to have, the data, and there's no magic bullet for data quality. You absolutely have to have data stewarding. We do a lot of this work. It's 2/3 of our business now. That's what a big deal this is. And a lot of it we do automated, which is really good because it's fast and efficient. but there's some level of it too that you do need to have actual humans looking at the data. Like if you have an ERM system, it's great, it's going to minimize your data stewarding, but you've got to put eyes on those contacts. Because, for instance, if somebody's middle initial is in their email address, it can just break the whole parsing of the ERM system, creating the contacts. If somebody's got like PHP, whatever, after their name, it doesn't know what to do with that. It mixes up phone numbers. It misses addresses. And you need your data to be consistent too. Because like if you're going to search, just like you said, if you're searching for a company and the company is entered 3 different ways, with or without periods, abbreviations, what is GE, right? If you don't enter that data correctly and consistently, you can't search for it. So show me everybody that's a CEO. Well, are they a CEO, a C period, E period, O period, or a chief executive officer? If your data is not consistent, you're going to miss 2/3 of the data if you search for just one or the other. So you end up building really complex searches if if you're sharp, but it's a lot of work. So I can't say enough how important data stewarding is. It's only gotten more so. But the good news is, you don't have to do this internally. You can actually outsource it, usually, less expensively than you can doing it internally. But yeah,
I like assess the mess.
Yeah, assess the mess.
It's so critical because it's I think back where we looked at a firm, we're looking at their top clients, their key clients. By the way, that's not a bad conversation to have right now, Chris, is where to start, right? Where do you start? Now, a lot of firms have this. A lot of firms, they've got the marketing, the BD, the revenue generation, and maybe not people on a sales team yet, but let's say the lawyers or the sales team, whoever's doing the selling, right? And the relationship building on that level, out externally facing. It's really, really critical to start with the firm's clients. And everybody wants new business. We're not even putting our toe in the water on origination and how that messes everything up. But it's really, really critical to have those clients that represent 85% of the firm's revenue. That information has to be correct. And you don't need the lawyers involved to fix that data, but it's critical to the success of the marketing and BD team to have that data right. So go to finance, get a list of all those clients that represent, in any firm, it's very rare that you see more than 200 clients representing 85% of the revenue. Very rare. I don't care how big the firm is. And so it's easy to clean up that data. Or is it, right? So we were working with a firm, and it took, finally, the managing partner said, I'm just going to send every single client of mine a list of all the contacts we have at that company. I'm going to put a FedEx return envelope with it, and I'm going to ask the clients to fix it. And the clients, believe it or not, were delighted to fix it. We had all the right information on those top clients and off and running. And so sometimes you just got to get creative. It's, again, how do we work around the lawyers to get the right data, and how do we fix it? But always start with the top clients, right? Because that's where the revenue is.
Yep. Yeah. And you could actually take that process a little differently and handle it through technology.
Sure.
And approach it the same way. Through a phone call, through a personal connection, and say, hey, we value the relationship. We're going to send you a link, so that we don't have to do this via the mail and people, typing things or whatever and mailing things back, and just automate that process. So a lot of firms will take their subscription form or their opt-outs on their e-newsletters. And when you click the button to opt out or manage subscriptions, by the way, you should always manage subscriptions, not opt out to everything, but they should have the ability to, at that point, update their contact information. You're sending them an event invitation. Hey, update your contact information. Years ago, firms used to send once a year to all their contacts. They would send them, hey, here's the information we have on file for you. Can you let us know if this is correct? I don't hear as much of that anymore, but I always thought that was a really good practice. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talk about bad data and people not working in the office full time. Let's talk about how do we even manage all of the various places and inputs that the data is coming from.
Yeah, and by the way, everybody, she and I can talk about this all day long. This
We
is
can.
such
We'd
a
love to
such a
have some questions in the
yeah.
chat.
So feel free, put some questions in there because we want to make sure that this is responsive to, to answering all the questions that you all have and anything that you need. So, happy to take the topic in any direction you so direct.
We did have one question, which was, how are you seeing salespeople allocated in law firms? Are you seeing 1 to 2 people assigned to a practice group or industry group? That would be awesome. or are they generalists? So, what we're seeing is there could be a person assigned to a practice group or an office or a group of partners, and that person is generally on an island with those partners. That's, and they're doing great things, but that person is not available to the whole firm. So that's a model that we've seen. And I think it's okay, but again, not everybody has access to that individual. The second model we're seeing is that salespeople are coming into firms and they're being managed by marketing people. And I don't mean any slight here. It's that if you hire a salesperson, you want this person to be successful. And this person knows how to generate revenue. They're going to be aggressive. That's in a positive way. They're going to be aggressive. They're very goal oriented, and they are not going to be managed. So that's something you have to get used to. And especially they don't want to be managed by somebody who's never carried a bag. So it's a reality. If you have sales experience, it's going to be easier to manage a sales team. If you don't, you need to hire a director of sales to manage those people. It's not going to be easy. And it will get, I think, this is me, Silvia, speculating. I think it will get ugly fast. Either that, or you have to be a kick butt manager of people, right? Those are the only 2 things that work if you're going to build and manage a sales team. So aside from that, I would say firms are hiring salespeople 1 by 1. It's rare to see, like I mentioned before, 16 salespeople in a firm. And that started off in a big, big corporate practice of a global firm. And now it's starting to spread across industries on the corporate side. So it's in its infancy. Firms are trying to figure it out. My recommendation is always go meet with your peers at accounting firms. They've been through it. They see how it's done. They see how it works well. You can call Jim Cranston from our team. He worked at PwC in Anderson. Steve Bell worked at PwC and Grant Thornton and ran sales teams. He ran sales teams at Womble. Any of us are involved in building sales teams, but it's emerging and it's not an easy one. And everybody, when they figure out this really works, every lawyer wants a piece of that person. So it's got to be really, really well managed. I wrote an article a while back, and I believe, there were some in-house counsel quoted and a couple of managing partners. One was from Adam Severson's firm, Baker Donaldson, and she had some really, really great key points to make about bringing people into the firm like that. And of course, everybody, if you know Adam, he's a great salesperson and a good manager. So I think it's tricky. That's my answer, Jason, to your question. It's not going to be easy, but no, it would be ideal to see a salesperson or 2 for every practice in the firm. But I think we're miles away from that. I don't think we're feet away from that. I think we're miles away from that. But when we do, then all of a sudden, all of the stuff we've been talking about, Chris, is going to take on a whole new meaning in the firms.
Well, yeah, and they're going to come in. I mean, these people have worked in sales organizations where they had the technology to support it. They had the technology for follow-up and reminders and, of course, pipeline and business and activity tracking, even though many salespeople hate to use CRM. Mm-hmm. That's a whole conversation for another day. They're going to need these tools to support them. They're going to need access to the intelligence information, and they have to have the highest level of support. And what I'm seeing mostly, firms are are still in the experimentation process. They have a key group that they want to expand. And so maybe they're going to try to bring in a salesperson for that group. But, you know, like you said, we're still learning here.
We are. So a question for you's come in, Chris, which is, are there any programs that allow you to send out an email to individuals on your contact list that shows them the address you have on file for them and ask them to update? Sort of like what you would do if you did a mail merge letter to them. Back in the day, I was one of those people who did the yearly hard copy email to all the contacts we had in our database.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, almost that's, I mean, that technology has existed, you know, I think Interaction came out with it years ago. There was a separate tool that you could use, and then it was built into the system. All these systems allow you through a web form to reach out to everyone on your database and ask them to update their information. Again, I think it's a great practice to do. The best practice there, though, is you don't do everybody all at once, because when they start coming back in, it's a lot to deal with. And so you ought to have a process for regularly reviewing client data and sending it to them for their updates. And of course, you have to be mindful, you know, if you have clients in or contacts in Europe, make sure that you've got GDPR protections in place so that you're not, you know, because you're making them aware that they're in your database, and that certainly brings GDPR concerns, you know, front of mind. But yeah, you should absolutely do that. And usually they're happy to be asked.
And, you know, I'm going to maybe walk out on a limb here, but I just don't think you get permission to do this ahead of time. Just do it. Get the data cleaned up. Don't ask the lawyers to be involved in this. Don't ask their permission. Just go out and send an email and get the data right. They'll appreciate it.
Yeah, no, and then some firms too, there's another, you know, do you ask permission? In many firms, you know, where you have lawyers who are hesitant to share, which it's not as bad as it was by any means, but I still run across some of that. You know, they're concerned that if I share my contact, it used to be somebody else could see it or pitch them or whatever, but now it's like, well, I don't want them to just land on a marketing list. And in most firms, that's taboo. You don't just put somebody on a list, but in some firms you do, you know, and maybe, I'm not saying good or bad, but it's a strategy. We have an industry practice around healthcare, and we have a healthcare event list, and we have a healthcare newsletter. And do you put those people on, you know, can you code them by industry? First of all, that's important. And then can you add them to the newsletter based on the fact that they're in that industry? And many people do this, and not so much in law firms, but outside of law firms, it happens all the time. So, you know, we have to figure out, because lots of the firms I work with, they're like, you know, here's our top 300 clients. We have 300 company top clients. And of those, 400 total people on any of our communication lists. There were 12,000 contacts, and like 400 of them were on any lists. So there's a toss up. If we can't get the contacts on the list, do we just give up, or do we find new ways to get the contacts? And again, some firm cultures support that and some do not.
Well, this has been, I hope, informative. It's certainly, I always learn something from you, Chris. And, you know, it's a snippet of basically what is a much bigger pie. It's a spoonful, not even a piece of the pie. And so we're always available to answer questions.
Absolutely.
Send us an email. And Michelle, I'm going to kick this back to you.
And just from my standpoint too, this is a fun thing. Maybe since a lot of folks are here in marketing, they've seen this before, but these QR codes, they're easily available on LinkedIn. If you take a picture of this, it'll connect us automatically if we're not already connected. But show your lawyers how to do this and how to put this on their PowerPoints, and they think it's just magical. Also, if you need additional resources related to marketing technology success, and this is all my contact info, but this is the resources page on our website, has hundreds of pieces of info on marketing technology and BD success. They're just a resource for you. And we will be sharing the recording and the slides, and probably some best practices document as well.